to Trauma Undone. I am your host, Natasha Phillips, and today we are sitting with this incredible woman. She is the founder of Race to Erase and Cure Addiction Now. Today we have with us Nancy Davis. Nancy, we are so happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to meet you.
Nancy, I mean, you have just such an incredible story and a beautiful way that you have come out of your experience. Do you mind sharing that with us?
I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 31 years ago. At the time, I was told I would never walk again, and life as I knew it was over, that the most that I could look forward to in my life is operating the remote control on my TV set, and then I would never be able to walk, get out of bed. And they said, well, your children, I had 3 beautiful sons, and they said, your children will be able to push you in a wheelchair. I'm like, wow, I'm 33. That wasn't the life that I had planned. It was not. I was super lucky that I could go get a second opinion, and I got many. Eventually I got 7. I was hoping someone would say, you do not have multiple sclerosis, this horrible disease, which had not been researched much. At the time, there was no known cause, no cure, no drugs, no treatments, nothing on the market. However, I was lucky that I was able to meet these other doctors and getting second opinions. Everyone did tell me I had MS. Got different prognosis from different doctors. Not always negative as the first one. I listened to the research that they were all doing, and they wanted me to get involved with their different centers. This was Harvard, Yale, the Cleveland Clinic, USC, UC San Francisco, Johns Hopkins, very impressive centers. But they were all doing identical research as each other and knew that they were the only one doing that research, which is obviously not true. And it occurred to me, if we could get the best and the brightest doctors to work as a team, to never duplicate research, to constantly communicate, we're going to find a cure a lot quicker. So we started something called the Center Without Walls. We never put any money into a building. We fund highly important basic science research. We have arguably the best of the best doctors. And today, that whole trajectory has changed from 0 medications and 0 things you could do. There's now 25 drugs on the market to help stop the progression of MS. 18 of those we did the pilot studies for at Race to Erase MS. So we do an event every year called the Race to Erase MS. It's going to be our 30th year, coming up very soon, June 2nd. And we're really excited that that person like me, usually a young woman, it's at least 3 times as many women as men get it. 33 seems to be the absolute average age people get it. They get it between 20 and 40. And for that person diagnosed today, there's so many amazing options that you can do and ways of giving you maybe a 92% chance of living an independent and good quality of life.
That is incredible. I mean, that's just amazing, because I know people along my life and my journey who feel like it's a death sentence. And here you are, many, many years on, completely independent, functional, and you've taken this diagnosis that was given to you and turned it into an absolute blessing for other people.
I was given that death sentence, and I'm never good at sitting there being depressed. I think my mind always works. I'm like, hey, let's find a solution. Let's look at this. Let's turn this upside down, and let's look at it the opposite way that everybody else is, because there's got to be a better way. And I was, in that moment, I was super lucky that I could do what I did. I had a lot of love and support behind me. We had our first charity event in Aspen, Colorado. I grew up in Colorado, and the incidence of MS is 10 times higher in Colorado than it would be in places like Los Angeles, where I now live. So there's a really good chance that I probably got MS living in Colorado. I went to a very tiny high school there. And so many people in my high school, a graduating class of 100, 7 other people in my class had MS. And that's pretty much considered an epidemic. So moving to Los Angeles is when I got it later on. I had a ski accident, and as I was recovering from the ski accident, it started making me lose feeling first in my hands, my feet. I started being numb all over, and my eyesight started going, and every day I'd lose a different feeling. But so lucky that I had the privilege of getting a second opinion. A lot of people don't understand just how important that is, because we very often let our doctors play God for us, and no doctor is God. You have to really rely on yourself, even when you're at the most challenging, hard time in your life. You need to be able to look at this big picture. So I was super fortunate that I could do that. And today I look at all these people who are newly diagnosed. I get calls so often from people who are newly diagnosed, and it's terribly sad and it's terribly depressing. But it's so nice to be able to offer medications in a future, and a variety of doctors and different medications or different treatments that might really help them. So to me, that's everything.
I mean, you've probably touched so many people's lives that it's quite amazing to have that, and to like look back. You're such a humble person. You probably don't even realize like how much you've affected people, and how incredible that gift is that you've given to people.
Thank you. That's very sweet. But it's not just me. I have the love and support of friends, of family. The Hollywood community has really gotten behind me since the very first year. We did our first event in Aspen, Colorado. We had a pro celebrity ski race. It was televised on CBS at the time, and on a sports channel, ESPN. And we were so lucky to give it that level of elevation. And every year when we have the event, all these amazing celebrities come and they've supported us. And you can't cure a disease with one person. It's a big village of amazingly generous people. So we're getting them. There's been some very challenging times throughout that, and I've heard so many terrible stories. I've had some, hardships and different things happen. But I feel very lucky that where we are today is quite amazing.
That is, and so now, Nancy, I want to shift focus a little bit and talk about your cure addiction now. Yeah. Because that is there's a whole other story around that. And again, you have taken something so tragic and making an impact in a positive way in the world. So do you mind sharing how Cure Addiction Now came to light?
I had this most wonderful son, Jason Davis, who is so unique, so fun, so kind, so loving, so charitable. He had an addiction problem for 12 years off and on to opiates. And if you are a parent or you have a loved one who's an addict, you know what that looks like. It is the scariest thing. You do not sleep at night. You're terrified. You don't know if you're going to get that call. So finally, Jason comes to me one day, and he's sober for 9 months. He goes, "Mom, I want to start a charity with you called CAN, or Cure Addiction Now." I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, I don't have any time. I'm too busy. It's too crazy. It's so hard running a charity. But I thought, of course I will. And so we set out. He goes, "I want to copy exactly what we've been doing for Race to Race MS." And as a little boy, when he knew I was diagnosed with MS, he would sit in the kitchen and try to create cures. He'd make potions, he'd make different things. When he got older, he would do his own charity events. He would get auction items, he'd sell tables, he got entertainers to entertain them. And there wasn't enough that he could do. He loved to help. He wanted to introduce me at the events and he really always stood up there smiling, so happy with the success that was happening. So he came to me and he says, "Mom, this is a disease that I have. It afflicts more people than MS does. And everybody is not doing well on this AA or 12-step program. If you're lucky enough and that works for you, that's amazing." He goes, "I'm one of the people it doesn't work for. Me and 93% of the population, it doesn't work for. We have to study the brain. We have to understand why the brain is making us crave drugs when we know it's really bad for us." He goes, "I've gone to rehab and people are leaving rehab. And the day before they leave rehab, they're sitting there exchanging numbers with all the different people there of everyone's drug dealer." And he goes, "That is so crazy and so sick that you're doing that. And you know that you've gone through such a journey to be lucky enough to just go to rehab, to go through the first month, to detox, to not die. I mean, there's so many people die from all the various things that happen during addiction. And there's so much violence and different things that are created by it. It's a really horrible disease." So he came to me and he wanted to copy what we were doing with Race to Race MS, which was getting 8 of the best doctors in the country to work together as a team, to never duplicate research, but to constantly communicate every month, and thinking in this way we will come up with a better solution. So I set out to do that with him, and it was really hard to identify any doctors in the research space. For 20 years, there had been no significant research, which is amazing.
That is amazing.
It is amazing, considering about 2 to 2.5 million people in our country have MS. There's multi-millions more that have an addiction problem. It's now, since COVID, is the leading cause of death in our country for people 50 years old and younger.
Wow.
And that we have turned our back and not done any research. We've always shamed people who have an addiction. Oh, they're lazy, it's their fault. It's not. A lot of people can have drinks, they can have a drug, they can try this and that, and they don't become addicted, and they can go party here and there in a healthy way. Sometimes they overdo it, they have a hangover, but they don't all become an addict. My son didn't try anything until he was 21, and at 21 he had his first dose of an opiate, and he became addicted. And he was a slave to that pretty much off and on the rest of his life, which happens with so many people. You hear about a 14 or 13-year-old kid going to a bar mitzvah and having their first drink, and something, it's like fireworks are going off in their head. They become an addict the rest of their life. There's a genetic predisposition. It's not because you are a bad person that you have an addiction. You have a bad disease that we have neglected. We've brushed it under the rug. We've shamed people, and it's time that it stops. And so we started a charity with my son, Jason. We got our 501c3 about 4 months before Jason did pass away. And he was so proud. We went to New York. We had a meeting with the 8 doctors, which were really hard to find, by the way, because there was not a lot of doctors who were doing research. You can look up at who has studies published in Nature magazine and different places. There's very few for addiction. There's a lot for MS now, which is a much smaller disease, but very important disease, obviously. But for addiction, it's rampant. And so we set out to find the best of the best doctors. We had this meeting, and Jason addressed everybody. He goes, look, we have to talk about the reality of this problem. It's about your cravings. It's a brain disease. We have to understand why is my brain, why is all these people who I know that are addicts, why do we keep falling down this rabbit hole and going back to being an addict? We don't want to, but we do it. We let our guard up, we try one little thing, and we're right back where we started. And it's terrifying. And he'd had many, bad outcomes of different things that had happened during his years of being an addict, but he was this person who, even if he didn't have a shirt on his back, he would give it to you. If he had no money, because at some point when you're an addict, you go through all of your money. You want to spend it on drugs, and nobody will ever give you money again. And there's this whole thing with tough love, which I don't really agree with. I think there's only such a thing as real love. You should never enable somebody to have money to buy drugs or to put themselves into trouble. But I think you always need to love and embrace that person because they have a disease. The same way that one day I woke up with multiple sclerosis. One day when he was 21, he woke up and he had an addiction, and that's a disease unto itself. We need to give dignity to people that have an addiction, but we also need to study it. We have to put money into really good research science, and that's what we are doing now. We have 9 studies going on right now, and we are coming up with some really amazing things that had never been studied for no good reason other than there's so much shame. There's so many different things. Jason and I would drive by the Veterans Building, and we'd see all these veterans who fought in the war to save us in our country, and they're all living in tents, and they don't want to live in tents. They don't want to be homeless. People are saying, oh, get them a better apartment, a better place to live, which is great, but if you don't deal with the elephant in the room, which they have an addiction, they might have a mental problem and an addiction all at the same time, which we deal with both with Cure Addiction now is the mental illness, because you can't have an addiction problem without having an underlying mental illness to go with it. Either one came first, one came second, it doesn't matter, but you have to deal with the whole person. So we're doing that. So we would like to create a study to help the veterans, everybody who has this problem, find a different way of getting better. But you got to look at the reality of what's going on. It didn't happen by accident. It happens because it's a disease. We're very reluctant to call things a disease that are a disease, and that's a disease. And it's not that somebody wants to do that. People who are addicts, they try so hard, and we have precious little to give them. If you don't have a fortune, you can't really afford to go to rehab. You can't go to detox. Your insurance rarely covers it unless you have, some very unusual, you're a part of a union like the pilots union or the auto workers union. They have special ways, but very few people have the ability and the luxury of going to rehab, and it costs anywhere from $25,000 to $75,000 $2,000 a month. And very often people need to go for 3 to 6 months or to a step down program. So there's a reason that we're not helping with this problem. And we don't have the tools even to give people who are in these rehabs to give to people when they check out a rehab. How can we give them a medication that's going to stop their cravings? They have cravings. And a lot of people, the second they get out of rehab, you hear about, oh my God, they're such an idiot. They relapsed. They spent this much money to go to rehab and they got out and they relapsed. What's wrong with them? Well, that's the disease talking. And so we're trying to find ways of saving lives. That's what we're doing. There's some medications we're working on that are so fascinating. There's a medicine called ibogaine. It comes from a tree in Africa, and it's not legalized in the United States yet, but it's so fascinating. You can take one dose of this and you'll go on this crazy hallucinogenic trip for 12 to 24 hours. But when you wake up, you'll have gone through the entire detox from one pill. And then for the next 6 months, you have no cravings for drugs, which to me is like everything. So we need to get FDA approval to have this and give this to a lot of people. In a clinical setting, there was a problem with, I think 1 in 20,000 people had a heart problem from taking this. So everybody needs to be monitored, do it in a setting. They need to, do an EKG and make sure that they're okay to have this medication. So that's one of the things we're developing. We're trying to develop a vaccine. It runs in families, and if it runs in your family, wouldn't it be great to give this to your child when they're born so they won't become an addict in their lifetime? So it's one of the things we haven't gotten there, but this is one of the big dreams that we have right now. We're creating something so you could go to your local drugstore and buy one of 5 kits if you're serious about getting sober and you can't go to rehab, which most people cannot. You'll pay $100 to $200 for a kit that will help you, and you will get sober. You'll go through the detox period for anywhere from 4 days to a week, and it will help you get through that, which would be terrific. We don't have that all finished yet either. That's one of the things we're working on, and we're just working on a bunch of things. We have a study that got published in Nature magazine in June from one of our doctors who's brilliant. When you first start detoxing, you have a terrible time sleeping. So there's a medicine called Balsamra, which is a non-narcotic sleeping pill, so it's not addictive, but it also cuts your cravings down for drugs between 50 and 80%. So that's a pretty amazing new thing that's out there, and we're working on another study to re-engineer it so there'll be a larger amount of the medication that stops your cravings. So hopefully it will help you sleep, and it will cut your cravings down between 80 and 100%, which would be amazing to have happen.
Well, Nancy, this is incredible. To hear you talk about this, when I went through my journey, or when I started my journey, I became obsessed with the brain, because I believe that's where the key to healing is. So to hear you talking about like you working on all of these things that are going to affect your brain in such a positive way is just amazing.
Oh, I admire what you do. I really do. And I know about your journey. You've told me, and I admire that you are doing what you do, and you're helping so many other people who have a similar problem. And everything does come from your brain. And sometimes we're trying to not look at the obvious part of us. And it all happens in your brain, the way we feel about ourselves, the projection we give to other people, the decisions we make. But all of our brains are not wired the same way. They just aren't, and they don't protect all of us the same way. And we need to understand it, and we need to fund really important research to really get an idea of what's going on to help people in the future avoid certain situations, know what they're most susceptible to having happen in their life. And we all, have angst. We all, have things that bother us. I see so many people today since, COVID happened. So many young kids, superstars, are trying to kill themselves. And we keep getting these calls. I'm like, these kids are such amazing superstars that you look up to them, that they seem like they have the greatest future. Why are they so sad? Why are they so depressed? Why are they so desperate? And there's got to be a lot of answers, because it's important to save every single life. Every life is so important. And sometimes you're in that moment when you're feeling sad and depressed and you're desperate. If you wait a day, you're not going to feel the same way as you did the day before. And there's lots of ways. And my daughters are doing a charity too, as part of CAN, called You Can Save a Friend. And so they're talking to a lot of younger people. I have twins that are 18 years old. they're talking to lots of young people about saving their lives. If you're on the phone with a friend and they're acting desperate like that, what do you do? How do you help them? A lot of kids are afraid of getting themselves in trouble or having their friend not like them. It's really important to speak up. You have to speak up. You have to talk. If you don't talk, you'll always regret that you didn't open your mouth. My daughters are doing something, a big campaign with Narcan. A lot of people know that there's a medicine that's coming over our borders every single day. There's something called fentanyl. It's being shipped from China to the Mexican drug lords. They're pressing this into every single medicine. So if you buy any medicine that's not in a drugstore, you have a 98% chance of knowing that it has fentanyl. And having one dose of fentanyl is the equivalent of you having 50 to 100 shots of heroin. Can you survive that? No. Can a kid survive that? Kids are buying these pills through Snapchat, and they have a drug dealer delivering it that looks like a Postmates delivery person coming with their McDonald's hamburger, their Subway sandwich, their salad, whatever, and they're posing as that person, but they're coming to someone's house. And by giving your kids a Venmo account, it's a bit of a dangerous thing because they're able to pay for it that way, and the parents don't really understand. But some of these parents are walking into their kids' rooms, the kids are on their computer doing homework, and they're dead. And it's horrifying. So we have to get wise to all this. There's a medication, and my daughters have been promoting this called Narcan. It's a spray. We're advocating that every single kid over like 12 years old keeps this on them at their home, in their backpack, in their purse, whatever. And we're advocating every school has it, every Uber driver, every Lyft driver, every limousine driver, because when people go out at night and they take those ride share services, sometimes they're doing because they're partying, they don't want to get in an accident, but what they're forgetting is they might be taking drugs, and the drugs are probably laced with fentanyl. Unless you buy it in a drugstore, there's a very little chance that you're going to live through it. And whereas back in the day, when I was younger, you heard about people trying, I'm going to get a Quaalude, I'm going to get a cocaine, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. They could try things. You cannot try one thing. If you try one thing today, you are going to end up dead. The only antidote to it is having Narcan on you right now. And there's some newer Narcans coming out, but it's something that's really important for everybody to have on them.
It is so scary. I don't even know how people are open to even trying it today with this knowledge out there. It's very scary.
I know, but a lot of people with Narcan, they're like, okay, well, I don't need that, I don't want that, or the drugstores don't want to give it out. I talked to somebody at a drugstore, and I said, how come I can't purchase this easily from you? And they said, we just don't want it to get in the hands of drug dealers. And I said, and why would that be bad? If you were the drug dealer selling somebody drugs and they passed out, you have 4 minutes to your brain damage. You have 6 minutes to you are dead. If you call 911, it's going to take them at least 10 minutes. The only way you can save that person's life is by having Narcan and spraying it up their nose. And it's kind of a miracle that it exists. It's not going to work every time, but it works in it probably works in 90% of the cases. So because of this thing that's out there, we are allowing all these people to bring drugs in our country every day. We don't look at it anymore. We don't stop it. There's now enough fentanyl in our country that can kill every American 7 times over.
Wow.
It is rampant. Before COVID, one person used to die every 11 minutes of an opiate overdose, which was horrible. But now it's one person every 90 seconds is dying from an opiate overdose. That is horrendous. We are doing a terrible job stopping this fentanyl and every other drug too. And they're making worse versions of fentanyl now with horse tranquilizers. And every day there's a new thing you're reading about. But it's super important for everybody to educate themselves, their children, everybody. One pill can kill. That's it. If you take one pill and you do not buy it at a drugstore, a reputable drugstore, mind you, there's a really good chance you're not going to live. Is it worth it? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So Nancy, I want to now talk a little bit about your own personal journey, because you've written a book that's coming out, and you did mention that your son did pass away. And that, please God, I never know that feeling, but that just must be absolutely horrific to get that phone call or to hear that news. Do you mind sharing that whole?
So I have a book coming out called Just One More Day. My son Jason, when he lost his friend Chris Farley, he was in a movie with Chris Farley called Beverly Hills Ninja. He died after that, and Jason was just completely and utterly devastated, didn't know what to do with himself. He wrote the most fabulous screenplay. If you could have that person come back for 24 hours, what would you do with every precious minute of that day? It got optioned a long time ago for a TV movie of the week, and it didn't get made. I was going through the most horrible time when my son Jason died. I was away in Aspen. Jason had been sober. He'd been doing really well in his life. And he was probably one of the first people to get COVID. And he was really sick to his stomach that weekend, didn't feel good, coughing, sneezing. But we heard about COVID, but we didn't know it. We didn't have the blood test. We didn't have, we didn't have the nose swab, obviously. It was way too early. It was February 16th, 2020. And I was away in Aspen with my daughter. My husband called me. And it was like the worst call you could get. I was walking through a snowstorm in Aspen, didn't have a good feeling at all, couldn't wait to get home. I was coming home that day. And if you're in Aspen, it's snowing, there's a really good chance the airport's going to be closed, sometimes for days. You don't know how you're going to get out of there. I get this call. My husband tells me Jason died. I fell over into the snow. I was so hysterical. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know. It was the worst punch you could get. We finally got, I was with my daughter, we finally got on a plane. We had to drive to another airport. And I was anticipating, what are my other kids going to feel like? What's my husband going to feel like? I mean, it was the worst thing that could happen. And the idea of burying your child, we all love our kids, but I think God meant for a child to outlive a parent, not for a parent to bury a child. I went into this mode of, I'm going to plan this funeral for my son, and I was like, I was so out of it. I didn't know what I was doing. So I did plan that. I was so devastated, and after the funeral, it was just like, it was so miserable. Then the world shut down a few weeks later, and everybody was, isolating. It was COVID, and everything just fell apart. It just seemed like he was at the very tip of that, and it brought this whole horrible thing. Some of my friends sent me books. A lot of people send the same exact book many times on grief. And I read the books, and they didn't do a thing. They didn't help me one iota. I talked to a therapist, didn't help me. I finally talked to a psychic. The psychic says to me, your son wants you to write a book, and you're going to write a book. And I'm like, I just don't have time. I can't think straight. I'm not going to write a book. And he goes, well, you are. I'm like, okay. So I went to the cemetery that day, and then I came back and I found Jason's script, and it was called Just One More Day. And I read it. I got into bed that night, and I started writing every single night. My Just One More Day. If I had the fantasy of being able to have my son Jason back for 24 hours, how would I celebrate every precious moment? And so I started writing, and I rewrote, and it started making me heal. It made me get to the core of the things that I probably didn't want to admit were hurting me. It made me deal with my guilt, my fear, everything I was going through. And when I started writing what my perfect day was, I started answering the questions that I couldn't answer. It started giving me closure on different things. And when I finally was at the very end of the book, I didn't really want to stop writing it because it was making me feel like I was with him every single night when I was writing it. Everybody would say, what did you do last night? Well, I was with Jason. I was writing my book, and it gave me some sort of solace. So I was finally in Italy. I was in Rome. I was coming into Rome, and I was up till 4 a.m. figuring out how I was going to really end my book. And it was hard to end it because it was giving me so much comfort. And so then I ended it at 4 a.m. And the next day I said to my husband, I really want to go to the Trevi Fountain today. And he goes, okay, sure. So it was the most sunny, hot day in Rome. I went to the Trevi Fountain. As soon as we get near the Trevi Fountain, it's pouring rain like you have never seen. It's the worst rainstorm, but there was no rain. There was no rain order. It was not in the forecast of the day. So I, crazy enough, throw my coins. I asked the person driving the car, I said, can I borrow your umbrella? They gave me an umbrella. Well, half of it was collapsed. I'm like, it doesn't matter. So I make my wishes. We get back in the car, and all of a sudden the rain completely stops, completely. And all of a sudden we're driving around Rome, and there is the most beautiful double rainbow. And I took video and pictures of this because it was like, he's here with me. Jason's here with me. This is meant to be the way this whole thing happened. We go to the Vatican. There's exactly 2 people on the grounds of the Vatican, and me and my husband and a friend. That was it. It was like in July, the amount of tourists that are there. I'm like,
should have been like a line around the block.
There's always a line around the block. There's more bodies there. There's probably 10,000 people. There was nobody. I'm like, oh my God. So I took a video of what that looked like, and I went to the Coliseum, same thing. And there was this double rainbow, and I just felt like it was my son Jason talking to me. I felt this book was really, it was a message sent from heaven for me to do and to help other people with too. And I hope that my book is going to help a lot of people deal with the disease of grief. And grief is a disease, and we don't know how to get through it. We don't talk about it enough. We don't acknowledge people's feelings enough who are going through a really challenging, mental issue. Depression, and how do you get through it? It's not that simple. It's not that easy. And I'm hoping this will help a lot of people. And I think a lot of people, if they write their own Just One More Day, I believe it's going to help empower them to get through that and probably have a different relationship with the person who they lost, and a different sentimentality, because it really makes you go there. You think about things that maybe you were afraid to even talk about, think about, and it's very cathartic. So I'm hoping my book's going to help a lot of people. And I know lots of people have lost people close to them through drugs, through abuse, through different diseases, through COVID. There's been so much loss. And I feel like my book's going to help a lot of people, and that's why I wrote it.
That's beautiful. Is there a workbook aspect to it?
Yes, there's going to be a workbook aspect that's going to come with Just One More Day. So everybody can write down their journey and how they want to get there, and how to take specific notes and how to start it and how to end it, and to sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end, and put your story arc in there. And it was the most comforting thing I could have done. I think it was the only thing that was ever going to help me get through what I was going through, because I was in so much pain.
I mean, I'm just thinking now how beautiful it will be when you start receiving all of these people's stories of their Just One More Day.
Right.
And that, I think, it's another way that you're touching the world in such a positive way.
Yeah, but I think, so many people have lost somebody, or everybody's lost at least one person that's really important to them. And I've told some friends about it, and some friends have started writing their journeys, and they're like, oh my God, this is like, you really have to be honest with yourself. You be honest with your relationship, and honest with what is that person's attributes. What would their fantasy be? What would they have wanted? What's the best day that they could have in their life? And how can you be along for the ride to create that day for them? It makes you know more about the person. It makes you realize all the little pieces that you maybe ignored and didn't pay attention to. They're all put together again. And it's very empowering. And I feel like I have Jason by my side all the time. There's certain things I do that have really helped me. Every night the sun sets, I go and I looked at the beautiful sunsets. I know since Jason passed away, the sunsets have never been so beautiful. And it's my moment every day to visit with him and think about him and have stories and so forth. So I'm doing that. I've also written or co-written 2 songs with the most fabulous writer and a friend of mine. And we're creating a We Are the World type of song that's going to help tell everybody more about addiction, take the shame away from addiction, and help empower us to find cures for this terrible disease called addiction.
It is. Nancy, I'm thinking now that your book is not only for people who have lost somebody. I feel people should read that and do that with the people that they still have alive.
Yes.
And just treasure those moments, because you never know.
And wouldn't that be nice? Because all of a sudden, you don't know somebody as well as you should, or sometimes you don't pay attention to certain signs that people have around them, and you don't know why they wear, red all the time, or why this is their favorite food, why that I put the hotel we were in that was his favorite hotel. I put certain songs in there. I put all the things that would have made Jason the most happy person in that one day. And I too made me the happiest person to have had this son, and to now realize why he was so wonderful, what he meant to me, and to identify all those different things that maybe I didn't pay attention to everything, but then I finally really did. I had to really sit down there every single night writing it. But I loved writing it. It made me feel better. It was like taking, some sort of medication, a happy pill per se, because it made me in touch with my feelings and things that I probably ignored for years.
I think that's so beautiful. So Nancy, somebody who is listening to this now and they decide they want to start this journey, they want to take some action now, what would you recommend that they do?
I recommend that they sit down and think, what would 24 hours look like in a day with that person? What would make them the happiest? What would make me the happiest? What would I want to do? It will start reminding you of things you probably never identified. Like, we really like going there. That person really liked to order this particular food. I don't know why mine immediately started with ordering room service in a restaurant and having pumpkin waffles. That's what he liked. And all of a sudden you start thinking, what does that really mean? And going to different places, Jason was writing a play at that time, and we were in New York, and he was so proud of the fact that we went and had this meeting for Cure Addiction Now with these doctors, and it was something he really wanted to do. And that was obviously, in the book and what he said that day. And I thought about it more carefully, what it really meant, because it was his journey, and it was so important. He'd been writing a play for a while, called Rehab the Musical. And I went along with him to meet these agents who really loved him and his project. It was actually something that really happened that day, and we were in New York. So my whole One More Day takes place in New York and at his favorite hotel. And when he was a little kid, Jason had also been in a cartoon called Recess. He was a Disney character for many years. And so I remember one time we had been at this hotel and we walked across the street, and there Jason was in a cardboard cutout, larger than life, in the windows of the Disney store. And he was so excited as a kid. He was like, this is the greatest thing ever. And so I kind of relived that moment, having tea at the Plaza, going to Serendipity late at night. We'd gone to a play that weekend when we were in New York, and we saw Moulin Rouge, which he loved every minute of Moulin Rouge and the different songs. And so, I don't know, I just incorporated some things that had actually happened and took a bit of license to create a few more fantasies that would have been the thing that he would have wanted to have. But it made me get to know him even better and be able to hold him in a very special place in my heart that I didn't even know existed. And it opened my heart in a very beautiful, different way, and gave all the little innuendos of his life so much more integrity to me, and an understanding that I maybe didn't look into.
It's so beautiful, and I can see your face lights up when you talk about this 24 hours in the story.
It was so incredibly healing, and it sounds very basic, but when you sit down and do it, you're just One More Day can be 2 pages, 4 pages, 100 pages. Mine ended up being like 110 pages, and I guess I had to cut it back a bit. But I needed to write what I wrote and say what I said, and it felt so cathartic.
It's so beautiful. Nancy, we are coming towards the end of our time together, and it's been such an honor to sit here and speak with you. But I want to know somebody who, either you can go from either way, somebody who has an addiction or has a trauma or a problem, or somebody with MS, what would you recommend is their first step after listening to this that they do to really propel them in a healing direction?
Whatever disease you have, and they're both diseases, you need to ask for help. And if you're not getting help, you need to ask for different help. And a lot of times people shut you out, they shut you down, they don't want to listen. I know when you tell people you have MS, they look at that differently than when you tell them you have an addiction. A lot of times people are not very kind to people with addiction. And that's one thing we really, really want to change, because that is a disease, as MS is, as breast cancer, as kidney disease. They're all diseases, and they deserve compassion and love, and people need to be kind. And if you're going to places where they make you feel bad, you need to go somewhere else where you will find love and compassion and help, whatever that means.
I mean, that only makes the problem worse, actually.
It is. I mean, when you look at addiction, even doctors are not very kind to their patients who are addicts. I mean, a general doctor, there's so many studies, and they're prejudiced against you. The nurses they laugh at you. They don't want to take care of you in a doctor's office. It's not fair. We do not choose our diseases. They choose us. And it's not fair for anyone to look down on anybody. We perpetuate the problem of addiction by turning our back and not giving the proper help to people who need help. We have to be open-minded to that. And if you're not getting the right help, you need to go elsewhere. And with MS, it's sometimes hard to find somebody who's going to be compassionate and help you too. But it's probably a little bit easier because there's a lot more quote-unquote MS doctors than there are addiction doctors. For disease that kills more people than any disease in our country, there should be a lot more addiction doctors in our country who have gone to college, who are licensed, who know what they're doing. And you have to look at it. Why are we ignoring the obvious problem? There's so much shame, and that's one of the big things that we're going to do, is we're setting out to get rid of the shame and to give people their dignity back. It's not okay. Nobody wants to be sick. Nobody chooses to have any illness. You don't sit there one day and say, I think I'll have Parkinson's on Wednesday. I'll have a little diabetes on Tuesday. We don't want any diseases, but they find us. And whatever disease you or your loved one has is the most important disease. When one person in a family is diagnosed with either an addiction, MS, the whole family has the disease. All of a sudden, and everybody needs to do research, and everybody needs to support that person no matter what that disease is. It's really important.
That's such good information, actually, that you work together as a team. Nancy, is there anything that I haven't asked you or you haven't shared today that you'd like to share?
I'm so grateful to be here and to talk to you, and I admire what you're doing, and I admire how you're helping so many other people who are having these tough journeys and trauma in their life. And I think it's really important to seek out the best advice you can get and not come down on yourself if you've been going through a really hard time. You're not the only person going through whatever you've gone through. You're definitely not. And I think you feel very isolated when you're diagnosed with something, that you are the only person. And it's never that way. When you start reaching out, you're like, oh my God, everybody has this problem. And there's a lot to be gained by other people having the same problem you have and saying, what are they doing? How are they helping it? Maybe I can learn a few tools that are going to help me get through what I need to get through.
That's imperative. I mean, yeah. I wish I could have more time with you. But I want to know, where can people connect and find the work that you're doing?
They can go to cureaddictionnow.org and find anything that they want. And we have some different events that are happening in Los Angeles and other places. And we have a great website, and we're trying to help lots of people. And we have another website, erasems.org. And we have a big event coming up June 2nd in Los Angeles. It's going to be super fabulous with great entertainment and everything. And on both of those things, we need all the help in the world. We need financial support, moral support, and everything that you could think of.
Well, Nancy, you're doing such incredible work, and we are so appreciative of it. And I feel so honored and privileged to have you sit with me today.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Trauma Undone. Let your healing begin.